The September rain fell soft and steady over Naples, turning the cobblestones of the Villa Dante courtyard into mirrors that reflected the gray sky. Vittorio Dante stood at the second-floor window of his study, a glass of grappa untouched in his hand, watching as the black Mercedes and Lancia sedans arrived one after another. Men in dark suits emerged, their shoulders hunched against the drizzle, their faces carved from the same stone as the ancient church where his Isabella now lay waiting. 48 hours. That's all it had been since she closed her eyes for the last time. The doctors called it heart failure. Sudden, they said, unexpected. But Vittorio knew hearts. He knew when they broke, when they stopped from fear, when they were torn from chess by betrayal. And he knew, deep in his own battered heart, that something was wrong. Isabella had been healthy. She'd been laughing just 3 days before, tending to her rose garden, her dark hair catching the Mediterranean sunlight like silk. Don Vittorio. Marco Ferretti's voice cut through his thoughts. His consigliere stood in the doorway, those gold-rimmed glasses catching the dim light. "The cars are ready. It's time." Vittorio set down the glass without drinking. He straightened his black tie, ran a hand through his graying hair, and turned from the window. The scar on his face, a gift from his youth, seemed deeper today, a canyon carved by grief. The Chiesa di San Lorenzo stood like a sentinel in the Quartieri Spagnoli, its Baroque facade darkened by centuries of candle smoke and secrets. Inside, the air was thick with incense and the collective breath of Naples' most dangerous men. They filled the pews, these soldiers and associates, their respect for Isabella genuine. She'd been the light in Vittorio's darkness, the woman who remembered their children's names, who sent food to their widows, who never forgot that beneath the violence and the blood, they were still human. Lucia sat in the front row, wedged between her mother Rosa and Father Giuseppe. The little girl's eyes were red, but she wasn't crying now. She'd cried all her tears over the past 2 days, sobbing into her mother's apron, calling for Signora Isabella, until her voice went hoarse. Rosa worked as a housekeeper at the villa, and Isabella had treated Lucia like the daughter she'd never had, reading to her, braiding her hair, teaching her songs in the garden. The 5-year-old's legs dangled from the pew, her worn black shoes not quite touching the stone floor. She clutched a small wooden cross that Isabella had given her on her last birthday, her thumb running over its smooth surface again and again. The priest's words washed over her in Latin she didn't understand, but she understood the finality of the closed casket. The flowers piled so high they looked like they might spill onto the floor. Alessandro Dante sat rigid beside his father, his green eyes, so like his mother's, fixed on the casket, his jaw clenched and unclenched, the only sign of the rage building inside him. At 26, he'd spent years resisting the family business, dreaming of a different life. Now, all he dreamed of was revenge. Someone had taken his mother from him. He was sure of it. And when he found out who, not even his father would be able to stop what came next. The ceremony ended. Men rose, crossing themselves. The pallbearers, all trusted soldiers, lifted the casket. Vittorio stood, his hand briefly touching the polished wood, his lips moving in a silent goodbye. Marco stood at his elbow, ever present, a shadow in a gray suit. They processed out into the rain, which had strengthened into a proper downpour. The sky over Vesuvius was black, the volcano barely visible through the sheets of water. The courtyard in front of the church had become a small lake, and mourners hurried toward their cars, newspapers held over their heads. That's when it happened. As the casket passed, Lucia slipped from her mother's grasp. The little girl ran forward, her shoes splashing through puddles, her small hand reaching out to touch the casket one last time. Rosa gasped, reaching for her, but Lucia was already there, her palm flat against the wet wood. "Signora Isabella," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. Vittorio stopped. Alessandro stopped. Every man in that courtyard stopped. Lucia's eyes were closed, rainwater streaming down her face like tears. And then she spoke, her voice taking on a strange, distant quality, as if she were somewhere else entirely, repeating words she'd heard in a dream. E avvelenato. The Italian words cut through the rain like a knife. It's poisoned. Vittorio turned slowly, his eyes finding the child. The rain plastered his graying hair to his skull, made his scar stand out white against his olive skin. What did you say? Rosa rushed forward, grabbing Lucia's arm. Mi scusi, Don Vittorio. She doesn't know what she's saying. The grief? She's just a child. What did you say? Vittorio's voice was louder now, harder. He took a step toward them. Lucia opened her eyes. They were clear, focused, certain. E avvelenato, she repeated. That's what Signora Isabella said, her last words. She whispered them to me. The courtyard had gone silent except for the drumming rain. Alessandro moved closer, his hand instinctively going to his mother's casket. When? When did she say this? 3 nights ago, Lucia said, her small voice steady. She called me to her bedroom. Everyone else was asleep. She was so sick, but she made me promise not to tell anyone until after. She said if I told before, they'd hurt Mama. She said to wait until the funeral, until everyone was watching, and then to say it out loud where everyone could hear. Marco Ferretti stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. Don Vittorio, the child is traumatized. Isabella had heart failure. The doctors saw what they were paid to see, Alessandro snarled, rounding on Marco. Or what they were told to see. My mother was healthy. She was 45 years old. People don't just die. Vittorio held up a hand, silencing them all. He crouched down, his expensive suit soaking up rainwater from the cobblestones, bringing himself eye level with Lucia. Up close, he could see she was trembling, but not from fear. From cold, and from the weight of the secret she'd been carrying. Lucia, he said softly, in a tone no one in that courtyard had heard in years. Look at me, Piccola. Did my Isabella truly say these words to you? The little girl nodded. She said, Lucia, my sweet girl, I need you to remember something very important. And then she told me to repeat it back to her 3 times so I wouldn't forget. E avvelenato. She said it 3 times, and I said it 3 times. She made me promise on my wooden cross. Vittorio's hand went to his face, covering his mouth. When he lowered it, his eyes were darker than the storm clouds above. He stood, water running off him in streams, and looked at the gathered men. No one leaves Naples. No one makes a phone call. No one warns anyone of anything. Marco, get Antonio and Bruno. We're going to the villa. Now. Vittorio, please, Marco said, his voice tight. Think about what you're doing. An accusation like this, based on a child's memory. My wife is dead, Vittorio said, each word dropping like a stone into water. If there's even a chance that someone at my table, someone in my house, someone I trusted with my life put poison in her food, in her wine, in her medicine, then I will burn this city to the ground to find them. Do you understand me, Marco? Marco's eyes flickered behind his glasses. Of course, Don Vittorio. Whatever you need. Father Giuseppe stepped forward, his old hand shaking as he reached out. Vittorio, my son, I must speak with you, in private. It's a matter of confession. Vittorio's eyes narrowed. Not now, Padre. It must be now. The priest's voice was firmer than anyone expected. Before you do something that cannot be undone, please. 5 minutes. In the confessional. The 2 men stared at each other, the rain continuing its relentless assault. Finally, Vittorio nodded. 5 minutes. Alessandro, take the child and her mother to the villa. Keep them in the guest quarters. Marco, you're with me. As the crowd began to disperse, Lucia looked back at the casket, now being loaded into the hearse. She'd done what Isabella asked. She'd said the words. But even at 5 years old, she understood that saying them had changed everything. The men's faces had gone hard, their eyes cold. Violence hung in the air, sharper than the rain. Her mother squeezed her hand as they climbed into one of the black sedans. Alessandro slid in beside them, his leather jacket dripping water onto the seat. He looked at Lucia for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Was she in pain when she told you?" Lucia thought about it, remembering the way Isabella's hand had trembled as she stroked her hair, the way her breath had come in short gasps. "Yes," she said honestly. But she wasn't scared. She was angry. Alessandro nodded slowly, his jaw setting. "Good. My mother was never one to go quietly." The car pulled away from the church, windshield wipers beating frantically against the rain. Through the rear window, Lucia could see Vittorio disappearing back into the Chiesa di San Lorenzo, Father Giuseppe shuffling behind him. Above them all, Vesuvius brooded in the darkness, ancient and patient. Inside the church, the confessional was dark and smelled of old wood and older sins. Vittorio sat heavily on the narrow bench, and through the latticed screen, he could see Father Giuseppe's profile, worn and weary. "I'm listening, Padre." The old priest was silent for a moment, his breathing labored. Finally, 3 days ago, someone came to confession. I cannot tell you who. The seal of confession is sacred, even for everyone. But I can tell you this. They confessed to murder, to a slow poisoning, to watching someone suffer and feeling no remorse. Vittorio's hands clenched into fists. "Tell me who." "I cannot. Padre, with all respect, my wife is dead. Your seal of confession means nothing to me right now. It means everything to God," Father Giuseppe said sadly. "And it must mean something to you, or you wouldn't be here listening to me instead of already tearing apart your organization looking for the traitor. You know I'm right, Vittorio. If I break the seal, I'm no better than the murderer. The church becomes meaningless. And in a world like yours, the church might be the only thing standing between total chaos and some small measure of mercy." Vittorio leaned his head back against the wooden wall, eyes closed. "So what am I supposed to do? Let them walk free?" "No," the priest said firmly. "But you must find proof. Real proof. Not extract confessions through torture. Not kill every person who had access to your home. Isabella wouldn't have wanted that. You know she wouldn't. Isabella is dead because I trusted someone I shouldn't have." "Yes. And that child out there is alive because Isabella trusted her with the truth. Use that. Use your mind, Vittorio. You didn't become who you are by being reckless. Someone poisoned your wife slowly, carefully. That takes planning. It takes access. It takes a very specific kind of hatred or ambition. Who stands to gain from her death?" Vittorio's eyes opened. Through the screen, he could see the old priest watching him. "Everyone," he said bitterly. "Without Isabella, I'm unmoored, dangerous, unpredictable. She was my conscience, Padre. She kept me human. Without her, you're exactly what the traitor wants you to be," Father Giuseppe said. "A monster who will destroy his own house. Don't give them that satisfaction. Find the truth. Protect that child. She's the only witness, and whoever did this will come for her next. And Vittorio, when you find them, whatever you do it with certainty. Isabella deserves that much." The rain hammered against the church roof like the drums of war. Vittorio sat in the confessional for a long time after Father Giuseppe left, thinking about poison and patience, about trust and betrayal, about a 5-year-old girl who'd kept a dying woman's secret because she'd been asked to. When he finally emerged, Marco was waiting in the nave, seated in a pew, his gray suit somehow still immaculate despite the rain. He looked up as Vittorio approached. "Everything all right, Don Vittorio?" Vittorio studied his consigliere, this man who'd been at his side for 20 years, who'd helped him build an empire, who'd celebrated at his wedding and mourned at his wife's bedside. Marco's eyes were steady behind those gold-rimmed glasses, his expression concerned but composed. "Do you have children, Marco?" The question seemed to surprise him. "You know I don't, Don Vittorio. No wife either, no family to speak of, just the business, just This. Vittorio gestured vaguely at the church, at the life they'd built. It's been enough, Marco said carefully. You and Isabella treated me like family. That was always enough. Vittorio nodded slowly. Yes, we did. She loved you like a brother, you know. Used to worry that you worked too hard, that you'd die alone. Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Pain, or perhaps guilt. She was too kind. She was, Vittorio agreed. Too kind for this world. Too kind for me, certainly. But you know what she wasn't? She wasn't naive. She knew everything about our business. Every deal, every betrayal, every body buried in the hills. And she never judged, never condemned. She understood that this is the life we chose, the life we were born into. So when I think about who would want to kill her, I ask myself, who did she know something about? What secret was worth silencing the one person in Naples who kept everyone's secrets and never weaponized them? Marco stood slowly. Don Vittorio, if you're suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, Vittorio said coldly. I'm observing, I'm thinking, and I'm remembering. Do you remember 2 months ago when Isabella asked to speak with me privately? She was troubled. She'd overheard something, she said. A conversation she wasn't meant to hear. I told her I'd look into it, but then the Colombo situation escalated, and I got distracted. I never followed up. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. What if that got her killed, Marco? What if she knew something, and I failed to protect her because I was too busy protecting our business? You can't blame yourself for— I can blame myself for whatever I want. Vittorio's voice echoed through the empty church. She was my wife, my responsibility, and someone poisoned her slowly, day after day, watching her get weaker, watching me suffer, and they sat at my table and ate my food and looked me in the eye and lied. He was breathing hard now, his hands shaking with barely contained rage. Marco took a step back. Don Vittorio, please, let's get you home. You need rest, and then we can investigate properly, with clear heads. With avvelenato, Vittorio said quietly, watching Marco's face. Those were her last words, to a child. Not to me, not to Alessandro, not to you or the doctors or anyone who might have helped her. To a 5-year-old girl she knew would be too scared to tell anyone until it was safe. What does that tell you, Marco? Marco's face had gone pale. That she was delirious. That in her final moments that she knew. Vittorio finished. She knew who did it. And she knew that person was close enough to hurt Lucia and her mother if they spoke too soon. So she waited. She endured. And she made sure that when the truth came out, it would come out in front of everyone, where the murderer couldn't hide, couldn't run, couldn't silence the witness without exposing themselves. The two men stared at each other in the flickering candlelight. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease, but the damage was done. The cobblestones would stay wet for hours, reflecting the gray sky like pools of spilled mercury. I would never hurt Isabella, Marco said finally, his voice barely audible. She was the best of all of us. I know, Vittorio said. And for the first time in 48 hours, he smiled. A terrible, mirthless thing that made him look like a skull. That's exactly what the guilty man would say, isn't it? But it's also what an innocent man would say. So here's what we're going to do, old friend. We're going back to the villa. We're going to gather everyone who had access to Isabella in her final weeks. Every cook, every maid, every soldier, every advisor, every friend. And we're going to find out the truth. Together. Because either you're innocent and you'll help me find the killer, or you're guilty, and you're about to learn that 20 years of friendship means nothing weighed against my wife's life. Marco adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers. And the child? The child stays alive. She stays safe. Because she's the only one my wife trusted with the truth, and I will honor that trust even if it kills me. Do you understand? Yes, Don Vittorio. They walked out of the church together. But the distance between them felt like an ocean, The rain had stopped, leaving Naples glistening and clean, the air sharp with ozone. Vesuvius stood clear now against the evening sky, smoke rising from its peak in a thin gray column. At the villa, Alessandro had already begun his own investigation. The guest quarters where Lucia and Rosa were staying were under guard, not to keep them in, but to keep others out. In the main house, he'd assembled the household staff in the grand dining room, their faces nervous, their hands fidgeting. "My mother didn't die of heart failure," Alessandro announced without preamble. "She was poisoned, slowly, over weeks. And someone in this house did it." The room erupted in protests, in denials, in tears. Alessandro let them talk, watching faces, reading body language the way his father had taught him since childhood. Who looked genuinely shocked? Who looked afraid? Who looked relieved? Maria the cook was sobbing into her apron. No, impossible. I tasted everything before I served it. Every meal, every drink. If it was the food, I would be dead too." "Unless you knew which dishes were poisoned and which weren't," Alessandro said coldly. "I loved Signora Isabella. She was like a sister to me. Love doesn't stop people from killing. Sometimes it's the reason they kill." Old Giovanni, who'd driven for the family for 30 years, stepped forward. "Signor Alessandro, with respect, this is madness. Heart failure is what the doctors said because they examined a body that was already prepared for burial," Alessandro interrupted. "But I've been making calls, discreet calls, to doctors who actually know what they're doing. And do you know what they told me? That certain poisons mimic heart failure perfectly. Digitalis, for example, from foxglove plants, causes irregular heartbeat, weakness, nausea. Given in small doses over time, it looks exactly like a failing heart. And you know what we have growing in our garden, Giovanni? Do you know what my mother cultivated with her own hands? What she was so proud of?" The old man's face went gray. "The foxgloves. But Signora Isabella knew they were poisonous. She always wore gloves when she tended them. She warned everyone to stay away from—" "Exactly," Alessandro said. "She knew. Which means someone else knew. Someone who had access to the garden, to the plants, to her food. Someone who could extract the toxin and administer it slowly, carefully, in doses that wouldn't kill immediately, but would weaken her day by day until her heart couldn't take any more." A voice from the doorway made everyone turn. "And who had the medical knowledge to do such a thing?" Vittorio stood there, rain still dripping from his suit, Marco beside him. His eyes swept the room like a predator surveying prey. "Who among us knows enough about medicine, about poisons, about human anatomy to execute such a sophisticated murder?" The room was silent. Then Marco spoke, his voice tired. "I do, Don Vittorio. I studied medicine before I entered the family business. You know this. But I also know that at least 3 other people in this organization have similar knowledge. Dr. Russo, who treated Isabella, your cousin Salvatore, who trained as a pharmacist, and—" he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, "and Isabella herself. She studied herbalism, natural remedies. She knew more about plants and their properties than anyone." "What are you suggesting?" Alessandro's voice was dangerous. "I'm suggesting nothing," Marco said carefully. "Only that the knowledge required wasn't exclusive to one person. We need to look at opportunity, means, and motive, not just knowledge." Vittorio moved into the room, and the staff parted before him like water. He stood at the head of the long table where he'd shared so many meals with Isabella, where she'd laughed and told stories and made even the darkest days bearable. His hands pressed flat against the polished wood. "Someone in my house," he said quietly, "watched my wife die. Slowly. Painfully. They saw her confusion when the medicine didn't help. They heard her voice grow weak. They watched me suffer beside her, helpless, not understanding why the woman I loved was slipping away. And they said nothing, did nothing, because they wanted her dead. I need to know why. I need to understand what my Isabella did or knew or represented that made someone hate her enough to do this." The The cook, Maria, wiped her eyes and spoke up. Don Vittorio, there is something. I didn't think it mattered, but 2 months ago, Signora Isabella stopped eating certain things. She said her stomach was sensitive, that some foods made her feel ill. She started being very particular about what she ate. Only foods she prepared herself, or that were prepared by certain people. Vittorio's head snapped up. Who? Which people? Maria's voice shook. Me, Rosa, and no one else. She stopped letting the regular kitchen staff handle her meals. She said she just wanted simpler food, but now I wonder if she suspected something even then. Alessandro turned to his father. She knew. For 2 months she knew someone was trying to kill her, and she didn't tell you. Why? Why wouldn't she warn you? Because, came a small voice from the doorway. She was trying to figure out who. Everyone turned. Lucia stood there, still in her wet funeral dress, Rosa behind her looking panicked. The child clutched her wooden cross so tight her knuckles were white. Lucia, I told you to stay in the room, Rosa began. She told me other things too, Lucia continued, walking into the room with the fearless honesty of a child who didn't yet understand she was surrounded by killers. Not just about the poison. She told me that she was playing a game, a very important game, and that she had to be very careful because the person she was playing with was smart and dangerous. She said she was trying to catch them, but she had to make sure first. She said if she was wrong, she'd ruin someone's life. But if she was right and didn't act carefully, they'd kill Don Vittorio next, or Alessandro, or both. The room was so quiet you could hear the candles burning in their sconces. Vittorio crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before the child. Lucia, Piccola, this is very important. Did she tell you who she suspected? Lucia shook her head. No, but she said they were close. Someone who loved them, or pretended to. Someone who would be at the funeral. She said when I said the words, I should watch everyone's faces. She said the guilty person would react differently. Either they'd look scared, or they'd look angry, or they'd try to make everyone think I was lying. She said they wouldn't be able to help themselves. Every eye in the room went to Marco, who stood frozen, his face unreadable behind those gold-rimmed glasses. I didn't, he started. You were the first to say the child was traumatized, Alessandro said, moving to block the doorway. The first to suggest she was mistaken, the first to try to stop this investigation before it started. Because it's madness. Marco's composure was cracking. Vittorio, you know me. 20 years. I've been loyal to you, to this family, to Isabella's memory. I would never— Where were you 3 nights ago? Vittorio asked, his voice like ice. When Isabella called Lucia to her room? I was here, at the villa. I stayed late working on the accounts in the study. Alone? Yes. You'd gone to bed. Alessandro was in the city. The staff had retired. I was alone. So no alibi, Alessandro said. And full access to the house, to the garden, to Mother's room. I didn't do this. Marco's voice rose. Why would I? What possible motive could I have? Vittorio stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Marco's face. And then he said the words that made everything click into place. You were in love with her. The silence that followed was absolute. You were in love with my wife, Vittorio continued, his voice heavy with revelation. For how long, Marco? Years? Decades? Since the beginning? Marco's face had gone ashen. His hands trembled as he removed his glasses and cleaned them on his silk tie. A nervous habit Isabella had always teased him about. That's not. It's true, Rosa whispered from the doorway. Mi scusi, Don Vittorio. But I saw it. The way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. The way he always found reasons to be near her. Signora Isabella, she knew. She never said anything, never encouraged it, but she knew. And you thought, Vittorio said, taking a step closer to Marco, that if she were gone, that somehow, what? That I'd need you more? That you'd take her place as my closest confidant? Or did you poison her because you couldn't have her? And if you couldn't have her, neither could I. No! Marco's shout echoed off the walls. No, you have it all wrong. Yes, I loved her. I've loved Isabella since the day you brought her home as your bride, and every day since has been torture. But I would never hurt her. Never. She was everything good in this world, and I would have died 1,000 times over before I let anyone harm her. Then who? Alessandro demanded. If not you, then who? Who else loved her enough to kill her? Marco's eyes went wide. Then they went to Vittorio, and something like pity crossed his face. You really don't see it, do you? Neither of you. See what? Vittorio's hand was at his waist, where he kept his gun. The answer has been in front of you the whole time. You asked who stands to gain from Isabella's death, who becomes more powerful without her restraining influence, who inherits her portion of the estate, who no longer has to hide their true nature behind her gentle guidance. Alessandro's face went pale. You're not suggesting. Think, Marco said desperately. Who had the medical knowledge? Who had unrestricted access to the garden? Who had been growing increasingly frustrated with Isabella's pacifist influence on the family business? Who stood to inherit everything and finally take their place as the undisputed heir? Every eye in the room turned to Alessandro. You're insane, Alessandro breathed. She was my mother. I loved her. I would never. You fought with her, Marco pressed. 2 weeks before she died, in the garden, the staff heard shouting. She wanted you to go to university, to leave the business. She wanted you to marry that girl from Rome, the teacher's daughter, the one far from this life. But you refused. You said you'd earned your place in the family, that you were ready to take power. And she said no. She said as long as she lived, she'd never let you become what your father is. Liar! Alessandro lunged forward, but 2 soldiers grabbed him. Vittorio stood motionless, his face a mask. Marco, enough. Don Vittorio, please, you have to see. I said enough. Vittorio's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. He turned to his son, held in the grip of 2 men he'd known since childhood. Alessandro, look at me. The young man's green eyes, Isabella's eyes, met his father's. They were wild with rage and grief, but also with something else. Fear. Did you kill your mother? No. Alessandro's voice was steady. I swear on her grave, on her memory, on everything I am. I did not kill her. We fought, yes. We fought because I'm stubborn and stupid and I wanted to prove myself. But I loved her. She was the only one who saw me as something other than your son, your heir, your weapon. She saw me as me, and I would burn the world before I'd hurt her. Father Giuseppe's words echoed in Vittorio's mind. Use your mind. Who stands to gain? Someone poisoned your wife slowly, carefully. That takes planning. It takes access. It takes a very specific kind of hatred or ambition. Ambition. Access. Planning. Vittorio turned back to Marco, and something cold settled in his chest. You're very good at this, aren't you? Redirecting. Casting suspicion. You were the first to suggest investigating. The first to point out who had medical knowledge. Now you're the first to accuse my son. Always helpful. Always one step ahead. Always loyal. Marco's face went blank. Don Vittorio, I'm trying to help you find the truth. No, Vittorio said softly. You're trying to create chaos. To make me doubt everyone close to me. To isolate me until you're the only one left standing. Because that's what you've always wanted, isn't it, Marco? Not just Isabella. Not just love. You wanted everything. My position. My power. My family. And the only way to get it was to dismantle it piece by piece, starting with the one person who held it all together. That's not. Isabella knew, Vittorio continued, his voice gaining strength. She figured it out. Maybe not all of it, but enough. Enough to make you desperate. So you poisoned her. Slowly, carefully, with the foxglove she grew with her own hands. And you thought you were clever, pointing out that she knew about poisons too, that she could have done it herself, planting seeds of doubt. But you made one mistake, Marco. Just one. What mistake? Marco's voice was barely a whisper. You underestimated her. You thought she'd die quietly, that no one would question it. But she was smarter than both of us. She knew she couldn't tell me directly because you'd hear about it. You were always there, always listening. So she told a child. An innocent child who couldn't be threatened or bought or manipulated. And she made sure that child would speak the truth at exactly the right moment, in front of everyone, where you couldn't suppress it or spin it or redirect it. She outwitted you from her deathbed, Marco. My brilliant, beautiful wife beat you at your own game. Marco stood very still for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. It was a sad, broken smile that made him look decades older. She did, he admitted quietly. She beat me. I knew she'd figured it out, you see. I could tell from the way she looked at me in those final days. Not with fear, with disappointment. Like I was a child who'd broken her favorite vase. And that hurt worse than anything. I loved her so much it burned, Vittorio. Every day I watched you take her for granted. Watched you put business before her. Watched you make her cry with your decisions and your violence. I could have made her happy. I could have given her the life she deserved. But she only ever saw me as a friend, as a brother. Never as a man. Never as more. So you killed her, Alessandro said, his voice hollow. Because you couldn't have her. You made sure no one could. No. Marco's eyes were wet now. I killed her because she was going to tell you about the money. The money I've been skimming for 5 years. Millions, Vittorio. Millions that I'd invested in my own operations, my own territory. I was building something separate, something that would finally make me your equal instead of your servant. And Isabella found the discrepancies in the books. She came to me 3 months ago and gave me a choice. Confess to you and accept whatever punishment you deemed fit, or she'd tell you herself. I begged her not to. I told her I'd return every cent, but she said it wasn't about the money. It was about trust, about loyalty. She said you'd kill me, and she didn't want that blood on her hands. She gave me 1 month to confess. But you didn't, Vittorio said. I couldn't. I'd worked too hard, built too much. And I thought if she were gone, the secret died with her. I didn't know she'd told anyone else. I didn't know about the ledger she'd hidden, the copies she'd made. I didn't know until after she died, and I couldn't find them anywhere in this house. And then today, when that child spoke those words, I knew she'd won. The room was silent except for Marco's ragged breathing. Vittorio reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather-bound book. Is this what you were looking for? Father Giuseppe gave it to me this afternoon. Said Isabella left it with him for safekeeping, with instructions to give it to me if anything happened to her. Every transaction, every discrepancy, every lie, all documented in her precise handwriting. Marco closed his eyes. Then there's nothing left to say. There's one thing, Vittorio said, his voice cold as grave dirt. Did she suffer, at the end? Marco opened his eyes, and for a moment, the love he'd carried for 20 years was visible, raw, and terrible. Yes, he said honestly. The digitalis causes pain, confusion, fear. But I stayed with her those final hours. I held her hand. I told her I was sorry, over and over. She said she forgave me. Can you believe that? As she was dying from poison, I'd fed her. She said she forgave me because she understood what it was like to love without hope. His voice broke. But she said you wouldn't forgive, shouldn't forgive, and that I'd have to live with what I'd done. She said that was punishment enough. She was wrong, Vittorio said flatly. He pulled his gun. Wait! Lucia's voice cut through the moment. Signora Isabella said something else. Everyone turned to the child. She stood perfectly still, her wooden cross held to her chest, her eyes solemn. She said that when Don Vittorio found out who hurt her, he should remember what she always taught him. That revenge is a circle that never ends, and that the only way to break a circle is to step out of it. She said to tell you, the little girl's voice wavered. She said to tell you that she loved you, but she didn't want you to become a monster in her name. She said the man who killed her was already dead inside, and that killing his body wouldn't bring her back. Vittorio's hand shook. The gun wavered. She said, Lucia continued, tears now streaming down her face, that true strength is knowing when to walk away. That you were strong enough to let justice be justice, not revenge. And that if you loved her, really loved her, you'd prove it by being better than what you've always been. Better than what this life made you. The silence stretched. Vittorio stood with the gun pointed at Marco's heart, his finger on the trigger. Every man in that room had seen him kill before. Many had done it on his orders. This should have been simple. Righteous even. But Isabella's voice was in his head, soft and insistent, the way it had been on so many nights when he'd come home covered in blood and guilt. You're more than this, she used to whisper as she cleaned his wounds. More than the violence and the fear. I see who you really are, Vittorio. I see the man behind the monster. And he's beautiful. Alessandro spoke quietly. Father, what do you want to do? Vittorio lowered the gun. He looked at Marco, this man he'd trusted, who'd betrayed him in the worst way possible. And he made a choice. You're dead to me, he said. Dead to this family, dead to this business, dead to Naples. I want you gone by morning. No money, no protection, no resources. You leave with the clothes on your back and the guilt in your heart, and you never come back. If I see you again, if I hear you've so much as spoken my wife's name, I will end you slowly. But I won't do it today. Today I honor her last wish. I prove that her death wasn't meaningless, that she changed me even in dying. I step out of the circle. Marco sagged. Whether from relief or despair, it was impossible to tell. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me, Vittorio said coldly. Living with what you've done will be worse than dying. Trust me on that. 2 soldiers escorted Marco from the room. As he passed Lucia, he stopped, looked down at the small girl who'd sealed his fate with 2 simple words. You were her favorite, he said. She talked about you constantly, said you were brave and smart and pure. She was right. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Alessandro moved to his father's side. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Vittorio handed him the gun. I can't do this anymore, he said quietly. Build the empire. Keep the empire. I don't care. Your mother wanted you to have a different life, and maybe she was right. But if you choose this life, you do it without making her mistakes. You don't trust blindly. You don't love weakly. And you never, ever let anyone become as close as Marco was to us. Understand? Yes, Papa. Vittorio turned to Lucia. The little girl looked exhausted, her face pale, her small body swaying with fatigue. He knelt before her one last time. You did well, Piccola. My Isabella chose wisely. You'll always be under my protection, you and your mother. Always. If you need anything, you come to me. If anyone threatens you, you tell me. You understand? Lucia nodded. Then, surprising everyone, she stepped forward and wrapped her thin arms around Vittorio's neck. She said you were the best man she ever knew, she whispered. She said sometimes you forgot, but deep down, you were good. Vittorio's composure finally cracked. He held the child and wept, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Alessandro turned away, giving his father privacy. The staff quietly filed out, leaving the 3 of them in the dining room with its expensive furniture and its empty chairs where Isabella would never sit again. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Vesuvius stood clear against the evening sky, its smoke trailing into nothing. The city of Naples spread out below the villa, lights beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. In the harbor, ships sounded their horns. In the Quartieri Spagnoli, vendors shouted their wares. Life went on, indifferent to grief, to justice, to the small personal tragedies that made up the larger tapestry of human existence. In the weeks that followed, Marco Ferretti disappeared. Some said he'd gone to South America. Others claimed he'd entered a monastery in Sicily, seeking penance for his sins. No one knew for certain, and Vittorio never looked for him. He'd meant what he said. Marco was dead to him. Alessandro took on more responsibility in the family business, but he did it differently. He remembered his mother's lessons about mercy, about strategy over brutality, about building rather than destroying. He was his father's son, yes, but he was also Isabella's son, and he worked to honor both legacies. Lucia grew up under the Dante family's protection. She went to the best schools, became a doctor, and eventually returned to Naples to work in the free clinic Isabella had founded years before. She never forgot the woman who'd trusted her with the truth, or the lesson she'd learned about the weight words could carry. And Vittorio? He continued to run his empire, but something had changed. He was harder in some ways, more careful, more guarded. But he was also capable of mercy now, capable of choosing a path other than violence. On the anniversary of Isabella's death each year, he would take Lucia to the Chiesa di San Lorenzo, and they would sit in silence before Isabella's tomb. He never spoke much on those visits, but his presence said everything. The last words Isabella had whispered, "E avvelenato," had indeed poisoned everything. But in the poison was also the antidote, the truth. And the truth, however painful, had set them free. The wooden cross Isabella had given Lucia stayed in the family. Years later, when Lucia had a daughter of her own, she passed it down, along with the story of how a dying woman had trusted a child to speak truth to power, and how sometimes, just sometimes, the truth was enough. Vesuvius continued to smoke on the horizon, eternal and patient, watching over Naples with its secrets and its sorrows. And somewhere in the city, in a church or a grave or simply in memory, Isabella Dante rested, her final gambit complete, her husband saved from himself, her son given a chance at something better. The circle was broken. The whisper of vengeance had become a whisper of redemption instead.